Humans would rather be certain and wrong than uncertain and right. Certainty reduces fear. Dr. Stephen Michael here. This is Psychology, the Purpose Behind the Series. Clear and clean thinking. I'm going to tell you some stories over the next few minutes that will highlight our thinking processes, decision making, leading to the opportunities to create a much more fulfilling life for all of us. Let's start by going back about 1,000,000 years ago. The time of caveman and cavewoman. One night, caveman and cavewoman decided to have a romantic evening. They had a nice fire going. They had a fine dinner. They had some wine, soft music in the background. Okay, I'm embellishing a little. Unfortunately, though, a saber-toothed tiger appears at the foot and mouth of the cave. Their senses pick up the growling of the tiger. And they have to make a decision. They recognize that this is very dangerous and it's very frightening. And fear is a great motivator. And yet they were enjoying and having such a pleasurable evening. Romantic, again, fine wine, soft music. They decide that if they continue with their romantic evening, they would die. It's as simple as that. They saw this happen to other of their friends, other caveman and cavewoman people. And so they decide to run, drop everything, escape the tiger, if at all possible. Just to kind of close out the story happily, they succeed in escaping the tiger, and they have now the opportunity to have pleasure the next day. The next part of our story, in this historical context, is about Homo sapiens, who appear on this planet about 300,000 years ago. And here's something very interesting. From then to about now, that's 12,000 generations that have preceded us. Our DNA has been transmitted, yours and mine, over 12,000 generations. If somewhere in that chain, two people, a man, well, I should say a male and a female, man and a woman, didn't survive and procreate, you and I wouldn't be here. Wow, that's amazing. Just one chain link is broken and our existence doesn't occur. Shift a little bit more forward to more present time. The first major transformation in how humans lived was the agricultural transformation or revolution. And that happened about 10,000 years ago, only 400 to 500 generations ago. The particular story I'm going to tell you is about a shepherd who had a large flock of sheep. One day, one night, a wolf gets into the flock, kills and eats one of the sheep. The shepherd recognizes this soon, and he has a decision to make, thinking, what should he do? Two choices: go out and kill the wolf, or, novel thought, tame the wolf. He makes that choice. Doesn't seem like a significant choice, I'm sure, in his mind. He just makes a choice. And yet that choice led to the domestication of dogs that since then occurred. Dogs that make humans happy, provide joy, because a shepherd made a choice. There was this tipping point in the history of humankind. I'm sure he didn't know that. And so what I'm working on providing as I set the stage and foundation for this purpose statement of what is going to unfold in this series is for us to recognize that how we think, the decisions we make, the choices we make are so important that they can determine not only our destinies. Remember those 2 men and women in our chain that survived and procreated. How thinking better, thinking more clearly today can be a tipping point in history is why I've introduced these stories. We're at a tipping point today, you and I. There's an inflection that we're now at that is fundamental in the next transformation of humankind. Some people want to tip it one way. Some people want to tip it another way. I'm not here to tell you which is right, which is wrong, but I am here to assist you and me to be more able to think more clearly and cleanly and recognize that the choices, decisions, ways we act today may be tipping points for tomorrow and generations to come, one way or another. What's happening here? Why does all this matter? Please follow along to the end of this episode. And if you find it interesting and want to continue and want to be notified, then please subscribe, hit the like button, make some comments, agree, disagree, whatever you'd like. I have a quote coming up in a few minutes that's from William Shakespeare, and I've modified that quote. First, I want to emphasize again, the quality of our thinking influences the quality of our lives. Our thoughts help create our emotional experiences, and the way we think affects our relationships. Learning to think more clearly and more cleanly is not simply an intellectual exercise. It's one of the pathways to greater wisdom, better relationships, and a more fulfilling life. So here's the quote from William Shakespeare. To think clearly or to not think clearly, that is the question. Is literally, or at least metaphorically, to be or not to be, which can in fact be a matter of life and death. Forgive me, Mr. Shakespeare. Please listen carefully. It's profound in my opinion. You can turn a thought into a completely different life, for better or worse. This project, this series, is about clear and clean thinking. As I look back over my life, I can now see a thread that I didn't fully recognize when or while I was living it. I'll start with a story of a period of time when, as a young boy, I remember sitting under our dining room table while my parents argued. I remember feeling frightened, confused, and deeply saddened, and I was crying terribly, and I felt helpless. More than anything else, as I was maturing, I remember wondering why two people who cared about one another could become so angry and hurt each other so deeply. I didn't know it then, but that question stayed with me, mostly at an unconscious level. Years later, I studied psychology. I wanted to better understand not only just people's behavior, but their hopes, their fears, their beliefs. And I wanted to reduce suffering, the particularly unnecessary suffering that was self-inflicted by the way I could see people thinking ways in which our minds shape the way we experience the world. Over the years, I had the privilege of teaching thousands of students, serving as chair of the psychology department, mentoring young real estate professionals, working in my community, and working alongside extraordinary colleagues and friends. Looking back, I now realize that those experiences all shared something much in common. I was never most interested in telling people what to think. I was far more interested in helping people discover for themselves how to think. Throughout those experiences, one observation kept returning. The greatest difference between people were rarely differences in intelligence. More often, they reflected people's differences in their perception, their assumptions, their experiences, and the way they interpreted reality. That observation led me to a much deeper question. What if many of the disagreements we experience in politics and relationships and families and communities, and even within ourselves, are not primarily about what we think? What if they're about how we think and the underlying processes in the way the brain interprets the external perception of reality it receives from our senses? Most people focus on their opinions. Far fewer examine the psychological processes that shape those opinions. We ask, what do I believe? We rarely ask, how did I come to that belief? That question lies at the heart of this entire project. Throughout my career, people often spoke about the importance of critical thinking. People still do that today. While I appreciate the intention behind that phrase, I've gradually come to prefer a different expression. I prefer the words clear and clean thinking. In fact, I would say that's going to be the motto of this series. How to improve so that we get to clear thinking and clean thinking. The word critical, going back to that, for all critical thinking, the root of the word is critical, and that's about judgment, opposition, fault finding. Book critics, movie critics, art critics, everybody's a critic. But like I said, that's about opposition and judgment. What interests me is something very different. The thinking that I prefer to say is about recognizing the assumptions, the emotions, the biases, loyalties, and experiences that influence our conclusions. That needs to be addressed before we decide what we're going to think. Can we become aware of the filters through which we see the world? Of course. To me, that's the essence of clear and clean thinking. And frankly, wisdom. That is one of the essential purposes of this whole series. Again, the purpose of this channel is not for me to tell you what to think. One of the most important lessons I ever learned is that lasting growth rarely comes from being told what to think or what to do. I remember when people told me how to think, what to think, the socialization process, the media, teachers told me what to do, told me how to act. I didn't like it. And whatever they were telling me didn't necessarily stay. What we're looking for comes from learning how to think more clearly for ourselves. And it's not critical thinking. Again, it's clear and clean thinking. Whether I was mentoring a young real estate professional, teaching psychology students, or working with colleagues, my role was never to hand people conclusions or tell them what to do or tell them how to think. I always saw my role to assist and to help them, and one way was by having them ask themselves better questions. Because when we ask our brain better questions, our brain will either give back better answers, or as a problem solver, it will tell us how to get better answers, especially in the world we're living in today. One of my former real estate mentees from 25 years ago and I recently had a conversation, and he reminded me of something I had never fully appreciated. He told me that what helped him the most was not that I gave him answers. It was I respected him enough to allow him to reach his own conclusions. Interestingly, a few years ago, a college colleague that I'm still in touch with described my leadership as chair of the department in much the same way. He said, I trusted people to be professionals, to think for themselves, and to grow rather than to be controlled. Having those reflections helped me gain another perspective about my own life. Perhaps that's always been my philosophy. I don't know where it comes from, but it seems to have always been there. Respect people enough to let them think and grow. I can share with you one early childhood memory. I was probably 5 years old. And my mother, God bless her soul, who is my hero, she wanted to go to a department store and do some shopping. Now, I don't know if you remember when you were 5 years old, whether that was one of your favorite things. It was clearly not one of my favorite things. And in those days, the department stores, I grew up in New York until I was 8 years old and we moved to California. The department stores had these elevators that had a person inside that ran the elevator. Okay, I knew that. I just took it for granted. That's the technology they had at those days. Otis Elevators. Some of you remember that name. This story I'm telling you is a memory. We walked into the elevator. There were some people in the elevator. And one of them happened to be someone my mother knew who was a very prominent judge. And as she walked in, before she acknowledged and said hello to the judge, she said hello to the man operating the elevator and asked him how he was doing. Maybe that's where this philosophy comes from. And then, of course, she said hello to the judge. This philosophy of having people respected, showing them respect, not because of what they do, but because the elevator man deserved respect as much as the judge. We can still differ in terms of learning from one another. It doesn't mean every opinion is equally well supported. It means that lasting growth rarely comes from being told what to believe or what to do. I was never interested in creating followers. In all the years that I taught, in all the years that I was in important roles in the field of commercial real estate, I didn't believe that a fulfilling life came from being told and telling other people. It comes from a willingness to examine our own thinking with honesty and humility. Now, to be very frank, as you would imagine, along the way, I've made my own mistakes. There were times when I trusted too easily, overlooked warning signs, failed to recognize things I should have seen more clearly. Those experiences brought pain to me and to others I cared for and about. But those experiences also taught me something invaluable. They reminded me that I was responsible. They were my mistakes. I was accountable. And because I was accountable, I could change the way I thought. This is very important. Generally, when people make mistakes, they fail something, their outcomes aren't what they wanted, the tendency is to blame others. In psychology, we call this attribution theory, meaning how do we make attributions or attribute the causes to the effects we just experienced? The fundamental reason people blame others, which we call externalizing responsibility for failure outcomes, is because then they had nothing to do with it. And it eases their ego. They feel much less pain than saying, hey, I'm responsible for the mistake. That's an internal, what we call locus or center of control. The good news about willingness to take that discomfort is that we can learn from what we did and change so that we don't repeat this again. When we externalize responsibility for failure outcomes, there's nothing to learn. It's somebody else's fault. What am I going to change? And we can repeat the same mistakes. We'll talk about this in more detail. It literally was the basis for my dissertation and the final steps in my acquiring my graduate degree. The goal of this project is not for us to become perfect. The goal is to become more aware, more willing to question ourselves, therefore more open to learning, and more compassionate towards others. That, to me, is what clear and clean thinking is all about. This series is not about changing your views. It's not about convincing you to agree with me. It is about inviting all of us, including me, to become students of our own minds. Because I believe that when we better understand how we think, we make better decisions. We build healthier relationships. We become better listeners. And if then those people that we've encouraged and assisted become more compassionate and better listeners, then they influence other people. And remember in the series prior, or the beginning of this series, the shepherd story during the agricultural revolution? That was a tipping point in history. We're at a place right now that we are at a tipping point in what we're experiencing. The people and the ways that others want to control us, want to tell us absolute what to think, even to the point that they get to presenting us misinformation, so much flooded information that we don't know what to think, and literally propaganda and pathological lies. That's a tipping point. And I really am doing this so that we can shift that like the shepherd did who tamed the wolf and ended up allowing us to have domesticated dogs with the joy they bring. And perhaps little by little, we reduce unnecessary suffering. Suffering, which I declare is self-inflicted most of the time. There's pain, that's one thing. Suffering is a psychological experience to pain. Therefore, it's internal. And therefore, we may not be able to change literally the pain, but we can certainly change our thinking so that we reduce our suffering. If these conversations help you become just a little bit more curious, a little more thoughtful, a little more compassionate, then I will feel that this work has been worthwhile. And I request humbly that you recognize there is tremendous value in this series. And as a matter of the way it's presented, I ask you to subscribe, hit the like button, make some comments, maybe about what I just said. Maybe you disagree with anything I've said. Please make the comments. Wherever you're beginning this journey, whatever your background, whatever your beliefs, you're welcome here. You're safe here. My only role is to assist you. Along the way, I'm assisting myself in living a higher quality, better life that will influence the people around you. I hope you'll join and continue. Again, not so that you discover what you think. You already know what you think, but how we think. Because the quality of our thinking influences the quality of our lives. And I believe that learning to think more clearly and more cleanly is going to bring us much more joy along our journey. In our next episode, we'll begin exploring one of the most fascinating discoveries in psychology. We've called it in the field confirmation bias. It's a tendency that affects every one of us. And understanding it may change the way you understand yourself forever. So please, I thank you, I salute you, and I encourage you to come back for the next episode. Bye for now.